The ink on the marriage certificate had dried before Clara Whitfield understood what it meant for the life she had been quietly building in her absence. She stood at the window of her small rented room above the Caldwell Mercantile, her fingers pressed flat against the cold glass, watching the wagon roll down the main street of Harrow's Crossing with a stillness in her chest that was worse than grief. She had seen grief. Grief moved. This was something else entirely, the quiet collapse of an assumption she had never spoken aloud, which made it impossible to mourn in any way that another person could witness or name. The wagon carried Elias Kane and his new wife. Clara had not known he was returning. No one had sent word, which meant either no one thought she deserved the warning or no one had considered that she might need one. Both possibilities were equally credible, and she pressed her forehead briefly against the glass before drawing herself upright, because she was not a woman who let herself fold in front of windows where anyone might look up and see. She had been in Harrow's Crossing for 3 years. She had come the winter after her husband, Daniel Whitfield, had died of a chest sickness that took him in 4 days without ceremony or sufficient warning, leaving her with a modest debt, a rented room she could barely afford, and a set of bookkeeping skills that no one in the territory had initially believed she possessed. She had proved them wrong in the methodical, undramatic way she did most things, by simply continuing to do the work until the results were undeniable. She kept the accounts for 3 businesses on Main Street now. She had paid Daniel's debt in full within 14 months. She had money saved. Small amounts, but saved with intention, the way a woman saves who knows that no one else is going to save for her. She had not been building toward Elias Kane. She needed that said clearly, even in the privacy of her own reasoning, because it was the truth, and she was rigorous about the truth even when it cost her. She had not been waiting. She had simply been aware, the way a person is aware of weather on the horizon, that Elias Kane existed in the world, that he ran the largest cattle operation in the county. From the ranch his father had left him 12 miles outside of town, and that he had ridden past her once on the road to the telegraph office and touched the brim of his hat with 2 fingers in a gesture so brief it barely qualified as acknowledgement. She had catalogued that gesture and refused to attach meaning to it. She was 31 years old and had been a widow for 3 years. She was not a girl who built a future from the brim touch of a man's hat, but she had heard things, the way one hears things in a town the size of Harrow's Crossing, where sound carries differently in small spaces. She had heard that Elias Kane's ranch was struggling under 2 consecutive drought years. She had heard that the note on his northern grazing land was due in the spring. She had heard from Mabel Greer, who owned the boarding house and who heard everything as a matter of professional survival, that Elias Kane had not been the same since his foreman, old Pete Reardon, had taken a bad fall from a spooked horse 2 winters ago and died before the doctor reached the ranch. None of these things were invitations. She had not treated them as invitations. She had heard them and filed them the way she filed numbers, accurately without sentiment, in a place where they could be retrieved if they became relevant. They were relevant now, but not in any way that served her. The wagon had stopped in front of the Mercantile. Clara stepped back from the window before she could be seen, which was its own small humiliation, the act of hiding a face she had not even known she was wearing. She moved to her small table and sat down with her ledger open in front of her and put her pen in her hand and did not write anything for a full minute. His wife was young. That was the first thing Clara had registered, the detail that landed before she could prevent it. Young and fair-haired, sitting straight in the wagon seat with her hands folded in her lap and a look on her face that Clara recognized because she had worn it herself once, the look of a woman arriving somewhere uncertain, performing composure as a form of self-protection. That recognition was unwelcome. Clara did not want to feel anything resembling sympathy for this woman, and the fact that she immediately did was a piece of information about her own character that she noted without pleasure. She wrote a column of figures she did not need to write. The numbers were already correct. The action was discipline. The door at the base of the stairs opened. She heard boots on the wooden steps, heavier than the Mercantile owners, the stride too deliberate to be a customer browsing upward by accident. Clara set her pen down and folded her hands and waited, because there was no other reasonable response to a sound she did not expect. It was not Elias Kane. She had braced herself for an irrational moment against the possibility, and then released it because it was not him. It was Tom Greer, Mabel's son, 17, and wide-eyed with the particular energy of a young man carrying news he considers important. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, stopping in the doorway with his hat in both hands. "My mother sent me. She said you'd want to know before it got to gossip." "I already know," Clara said. Tom blinked. "You saw?" "I saw the wagon." He turned his hat brim through his fingers. "She's from Kansas. Name's Annette. They married 3 weeks ago." He paused. "My mother said the Kane North pasture note comes due in 40 days. Clara looked at him steadily. "Thank you, Tom." He nodded, replaced his hat, and left the way he came. His boots descended. The door at the base of the stairs closed. Clara turned back to her ledger. 40 days. She wrote nothing. She sat with the number the way she sat with any number that had weight, letting it settle, letting it stop moving, waiting until she could look at it without flinching before she decided what it meant. 3 days passed before Clara saw Elias Kane in person. She was crossing the street in front of the Mercantile on a Tuesday morning, her ledger satchel over one shoulder and a list of figures in her head that she was quietly balancing against the Hendersons' quarterly accounts, when his horse came up the road from the south at the unhurried pace of a man who owned more road than anyone else in the county and knew it. She did not stop walking. She adjusted her grip on the satchel strap and kept her eyes on the opposite boardwalk, because looking up would cost her something she was not prepared to spend in public. She heard him rein in. That surprised her. She had expected him to ride past. "Mrs. Whitfield." His voice was exactly as she had reconstructed it from memory, low, without warmth, without coldness either, the voice of a man who used words as tools and did not decorate them. She stopped walking because not stopping would have been its own kind of declaration, and she turned and looked up at him with the expression she had practiced for 3 years without knowing she was practicing it for this specific moment. "Mr. Kane," she said. He sat the horse well. He always had. He was broader through the shoulders than she remembered, and there was a weariness around his eyes that had not been there before. Not the weariness of travel, but the older, heavier kind that accumulates when a man has been fighting a losing battle for long enough that the fighting itself has become the habit. His hat was dust gray, his coat worn at the elbows, and his jaw carried 2 days of dark growth. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. She waited. "I understand you keep accounts for Henderson's dry goods," he said. "I do," she said, "and for the farrier and the Greer boarding house." He nodded once as if confirming something he had already decided. "I'm in need of a bookkeeper, someone who can also manage correspondence and land records." He paused. The position would be at the ranch. Clara held his gaze. The street around them had not gone silent. It was not that kind of town, but she was aware of Mrs. Prentice pausing at the edge of her peripheral vision near the post office, and of the Henderson boy loading feet across the road with a stillness that meant he was listening. "You have a wife now," Clara said, keeping her voice level and factual. Would she not take that role? Something shifted in Elias Kane's expression. Not much. A slight tightening around the jaw, a flicker in the eyes that was gone before she could name it. "Annette has no head for figures. The accounts are in worse condition than she knows." The honesty of that surprised her. Men in his position generally did not admit the extent of their difficulty until it was too late to address it. "What is the arrangement?" Clara asked. $4 a week. You'd ride out Mondays, stay through Wednesdays, return to town. Your room here is kept." He looked at the satchel at her shoulder. "I've seen your work on Henderson's ledgers. He showed me last spring. You found a billing error that saved him $60. She had found 3 errors, but she did not correct him. The North pasture note," she said. 40 days. His jaw tightened visibly this time. "You know about that. This is a small town, Mr. Kane." He was quiet for a moment. The horse shifted beneath him, and he steadied it with a single slight pressure of his knee, the gesture so practiced it was barely a gesture at all. "Can you fix it?" "I can look at what there is to fix," she said. "I cannot promise what I haven't seen." He nodded again, the same single motion. "Monday morning," he said. "I'll send a man with a horse." He did not ask if she was accepting. She noticed that. He had decided she would, and the unsettling thing was that he was right. She watched him ride on down the street, turning nothing over in her face that she was not prepared to carry. And then she turned and continued to the Henderson Dry Goods, and did not allow herself to think about it again until she was alone that evening in her room with the lamp turned low. She sat with her hands flat on the table and thought about Annette, young, fair-haired, sitting straight in a wagon seat with her hands folded, a woman performing composure as self-protection. She thought about what it meant to ride into that ranch 3 days a week and sit at a table with a man's ledgers while his wife moved through the rooms behind her. She thought about the North Pasture note and what 40 days looked like against a debt of that size. Then she thought about Daniel and the way she had loved him quietly and with great practicality, and the way his dying had taught her that sentiment without a plan was only sentiment, and that the frontier did not make exceptions for feelings that hadn't been converted into action. She needed the money. $4 a week on top of what she already earned would move her savings from adequate to meaningful. That was the reason she was going. It was a complete and sufficient reason, and she named it plainly to herself the way she named every number in every ledger, without embellishment, without apology. She blew out the lamp. Monday would come, whether she was ready for it or not. The ranch was 12 miles of hard road, and Clara covered them on a borrowed sorrel mare with her satchel across her lap and the cold of early morning sitting in her collar like a blade. The plains stretched in every direction without apology, brown grass flattened by October wind, the sky a pale and indifferent gray, the occasional cottonwood standing along a dry creek bed like a man who had outlasted everything around him through sheer stubbornness. She had not been out this far before. The town felt very small behind her. The Kane Ranch came into view at a distance before she reached it, which told her something. A prosperous ranch announced itself close up, tidy fences, fresh-painted outbuildings, the smell of well-tended animals. This one announced itself from half a mile out in the way. A struggling thing announces itself, the roofline of the barn slightly uneven on one end, the fence line along the eastern pasture sagging between two posts, the yard itself swept clean but worn down to bare earth in a way that spoke of too few hands doing too much work for too long. She noted it all without judgment. Numbers did not judge. They simply were. A ranch hand she did not know took her horse at the gate without a word and led it toward the barn. She carried her satchel to the front door and knocked, because she was a professional woman arriving at a professional engagement, and she would conduct herself accordingly, regardless of what the arrangement cost her in private. Annette Kane opened the door. Up close, she was not as young as Clara had first assessed, perhaps 24 or 25, with a careful prettiness and eyes that were doing the same quick, involuntary accounting that Clara's own were doing. They looked at each other for one honest second before both of them assembled their expressions. "Mrs. Whitfield," Annette said, "please come in." The kitchen was warm. There was bread on the table and coffee on the iron stove, and the room had been swept and ordered with the particular determination of a woman establishing her authority over a space she was still uncertain of. Clara recognized that, too. "Mr. Kane is in the barn," Annette said, pouring coffee into a tin cup without asking whether Clara wanted it. "He said to bring you to the study when you arrived." "Thank you," Clara said, and accepted the cup, and meant it. Elias appeared at the back door 2 minutes later, mud on his boots, a line between his brows that she suspected was permanent. He looked at her with the same flat assessment he had offered on the street, as though confirming she had not changed in the interval since Monday. And then he moved through the kitchen toward the small room off the main hall that served as the ranch's office without inviting her to follow, which was its own manner of invitation. The study was barely a room, a desk, 2 chairs, a shelf of deed books and correspondence, and a crate on the floor filled with papers that had not been filed in what appeared to be a considerable amount of time. The ledger on the desk was open to a page of figures entered in a hand that was not trained, large, effortful numbers with inconsistent spacing, the columns wandering slightly as though the page itself had shifted mid-entry. Clara set her satchel on the chair, removed her coat, and sat down. Elias remained standing. The main ledger covers the herd, the payroll, and the land notes. "There's a second book somewhere in that crate for feed costs and equipment." He paused. Pete Reardon kept the accounts before. He had his own system. "I'll find it," Clara said. She drew the ledger toward her and began to read from the beginning. Not skimming, reading. the way she read everything, with the full weight of her attention applied evenly across every entry. He watched her for a moment. She did not look up. He left the room. She heard his boots on the floorboards, then on the porch steps, then nothing but wind against the window glass and the distant sound of cattle and the small, persistent sound of her own thinking. She worked for 2 hours before she found the first serious problem. It was not the North Pasture note, which was large and obvious and already known. It was a secondary lien attached to the Eastern Grazing Land, a note held not by the bank in town, but by a man named Harlan Voss, whose name appeared in 3 separate correspondence letters at the bottom of the crate, in language that grew progressively less civil across the span of 8 months. The most recent letter was dated 6 weeks ago. Its final line read, "I will have the land, or I will have the equivalent in cash by November's end. There will be no further extension." Clara set the letter flat on the desk and looked at it for a long moment. November's end was 31 days away. She went back through the feed ledger she had located under a surveyor's map and a broken harness buckle. She cross-referenced the herd numbers against the grazing cost entries. She found 2 places where payments had been logged as sent that she suspected had never been dispatched. The corresponding bank receipts were absent from the crate, and the dates aligned with the period immediately following Pete Reardon's death, when the accounts had clearly gone unattended. She was still holding the Voss letter when Elias came back through the door at midday. He stopped when he saw her face. "There's a second lien," she said. "Eastern Pasture. Harlan Voss. 31 days. The silence in the room had weight. "I know about Voss," he said, and the flatness of his voice told her that knowing about it and having a plan for it were 2 entirely different conditions. "Did you know the note terms include a clause that transfers mineral rights along with the land title?" He went very still. "No," he said. "I did not know that." Clara set the letter on the desk and turned it to face him. He crossed the room and read it standing up, one hand braced on the desk edge, and she watched the line between his brows deepen into something that was not just weariness anymore. "I'll need the full correspondence file and the original deed," she said, "and I'll need 2 days, not 1. He looked at her. "Why 2 days?" "Because the answer to Harlan Voss is in these papers somewhere, and I intend to find it before he shows up in person." Something moved in Elias Kane's expression that was not quite gratitude and not quite surprise. It was closer to the look of a man who has been carrying a weight alone for so long that the simple fact of another pair of hands reaching for it registers as almost incomprehensible. He straightened. "I'll have your room prepared," he said, and left before she could respond. She stayed 2 nights, and by the end of the 2nd day she had rebuilt the ranch's financial picture from the ground up. It was not pleasant work. It was the kind of work that required a person to look at every failure clearly and without flinching, to assign numbers to decisions that had been made in grief or exhaustion or simple ignorance, and to find within those numbers whatever margin of survival remained. Clara had done this kind of work before, for the Henderson accounts, for Mabel Greer's boarding house books, once for a farmer outside of town who had wept quietly at his own kitchen table when she showed him that he was not in fact ruined, only badly organized. She had handed him her handkerchief and waited without comment until he was finished. She did not expect Elias Kane to weep. He did not. But she watched him read the summary she placed before him on the 2nd evening with the stillness of a man absorbing a blow he had been braced for in the wrong direction, the damage less catastrophic than feared, but the path forward narrower than he had hoped. "The North Pasture note can be restructured," she said, keeping her voice level and practical. "The bank will negotiate if you approach them before default rather than after. I've written a proposal. The language is specific. It references the herd valuation from last autumn's count, which was your strongest number, and it projects the spring calving yield at a conservative estimate." She set the page beside the ledger. "They will take it seriously because it is serious." He read without speaking. "The Voss lien is different," she said. "I found the original deed in the bottom of the correspondence crate. The mineral rights clause was added in a secondary amendment, not in the original agreement. Your father signed the original. You signed the amendment 3 years ago." "I remember signing it," he said quietly. "Voss said it was a formality." "It was not a formality." She kept judgment out of her voice. But the amendment has a flaw. The witness signature is from a man named Garfield Pruitt. I checked the county records from that period. Pruitt was not a resident of this county at the date of signing. Under territorial property law, a deed amendment requires a witness who is a county resident in good standing at the time of execution. Elias looked up from the page. The amendment is legally defective, Clara said, which means the mineral rights clause does not hold. Voss can pursue the land debt, but he cannot claim the minerals. The kitchen was quiet around them. Annette had gone to bed an hour ago, and the house had settled into the particular silence of a frontier night, wind at the walls, the iron stove ticking as it cooled, the distant low of cattle in the near pasture. A kerosene lamp burned between them on the desk, and in its light, Elias Kane looked at Clara Whitfield with an expression she had not seen on him before. It was not gratitude. She did not want gratitude, and he did not seem to be a man who dispensed it easily in any case. It was something more specific, the look of a man recalibrating, placing a person into a different category than the one he had assigned them, acknowledging internally that his initial assessment had been incomplete. She recognized the moment for what it was and did not perform any reaction to it. "You'll need to file a legal challenge before Voss makes his next move," she said. "I can draft the document. You'll need a lawyer to submit it, but the argument is straightforward once the flaw is identified. There's no lawyer in Harrow's Crossing," he said. "There's one in Millard Creek. 20 miles. I've corresponded with him on behalf of the Henderson estate." She paused. "He's competent, and he's not expensive." Elias was quiet for a moment. He set the summary page flat on the desk and smoothed it once with the side of his hand, the gesture almost involuntary, as though the act of ordering the paper was a way of ordering something he could not otherwise organize. "Why didn't you tell me all of this the first day?" he asked. "Because on the first day I didn't know it," she said. "I don't speak until I have something accurate to say." He almost smiled. It was the briefest alteration of his expression, a slight easing at the corner of his mouth, there and then controlled before it fully arrived. She catalogued it the way she catalogued everything and returned her attention to the ledger. "I'll have the bank proposal finished before I leave tomorrow," she said, "and the draft challenge to the Voss amendment. You should review both before I send anything." "You'll send them?" "I'll send the bank proposal on your behalf if you authorize it. The Voss document goes to the lawyer in Millard Creek for his signature first." He nodded. Then, after a pause that had some texture to it, not comfortable, not uncomfortable, but weighted in a way she did not entirely understand, he said, "You found this in 2 days. The information was there," she said. "It only needed to be read." "Voss has a man in town," Elias said, "someone who reports back to him." "I don't know who." Clara stilled. She had not known that. She thought about the Voss letters, about the escalating language, about the 6-week gap between the last letter and today. A man who sent letters that civil and that final did not wait patiently. He moved. "Then we should move faster than he does," she said. She picked up her pen and pulled the blank correspondence paper toward her and began to draft. Elias did not leave the room. He sat across the desk in the second chair and watched her write with the particular quality of attention a man gives to something he is trying to understand and cannot yet fully name. The lamp burned between them. Outside, the wind moved across the plains in long, cold sweeps that pressed against the window glass and found no way in. She wrote until the draft was clean. She did not look up until she was finished. When she did, he was still there. "It's late," she said. "It is," he agreed, but he did not move immediately. He looked at the pages she had produced, then at her, and she watched something settle in him the way a judgment settles, quietly, without announcement. He stood. He took the lamp from the desk and set it on the shelf near the door so the light would reach the hall. He said, "Your room is the second door on the left. The latch sticks. Lift it as you turn." It was the most practical form of consideration she had encountered in recent memory. She gathered her papers, capped her ink, and said goodnight without looking at him again. She lay in the narrow guest bed for a long time, with the darkness above her and the cold creeping under the door, and the sound of the ranch breathing around her in the night, and she thought about Harlan Voss and his man in town and 31 days, and she thought about Elias Kane sitting across a desk, watching her work with an expression she had not been given a name for yet. She did not assign it one. Not yet. The week that followed moved in the rhythm of work, and work, Clara had long believed, was the most honest language two people could share. She wrote out Monday and Wednesday both, which was one more day than the original arrangement, though neither of them acknowledged the addition as a change. It simply became the pattern, the sorrel mare at the gate in the early cold, the satchel over her shoulder, the kitchen warm with coffee, and Annette moving quietly through the back of the house with the careful self-containment of a woman still learning the dimensions of her own life. Clara had taken the measure of Annette Kane across those first 2 weeks with the same methodical attention she gave to ledger columns, and what she found was not what she had braced herself to find. Annette was not unkind. She was not foolish. She was a young woman who had come a long way from Kansas for reasons she had not fully disclosed, and who was now managing a household on a struggling ranch with a husband who spoke in short sentences and left before dawn and returned after dark. And she was doing it without complaint and without asking for credit, which Clara respected, even when she did not want to. They did not speak much, but there was a morning in the second week when Clara came in from the barn. She had gone to check on a mare that one of the hands had mentioned was favoring her left foreleg, because the ranch could not afford a lame horse right now, and she had learned enough from Daniel's farming years to make a preliminary assessment, and Annette had looked up from the stove and said simply, "The left one. I noticed it yesterday." And Clara had said, "The tendon's strained, not torn. She needs a week off the work rotation." And Annette had nodded once and turned back to the stove, and that had been, in its quiet way, the beginning of something. Elias noticed. She knew he noticed because he was a man who watched rather than spoke, who processed the world through observation and then acted on what he had observed without narrating the process. She caught him twice in the space of that week, pausing at the door of the study where she was working, not entering, not leaving, simply standing in the threshold for a moment before continuing on. She did not look up either time. The bank proposal went out on the Wednesday of the second week. She had revised it once after Elias read it and made 2 changes she had not expected him to make, both of them improvements, both of them demonstrating a knowledge of his own operation's value that he had not previously chosen to articulate. She noted that without comment and incorporated the changes. The response from the bank came faster than she had anticipated. The loan officer in town, a careful man named Burrell, who wore the same brown coat every day of the year regardless of season, sent word that he would meet with Mr. Kane the following Friday to discuss restructuring terms. She was in the study when Elias brought her the reply, and he set it on the desk in front of her without speaking, and she read it and said, "Friday is good. Take the revised herd valuation and the spring calving projection. Do not accept their first counter on the interest rate." "What's their first counter likely to be?" he asked. 7.5%. The number that works for you is 6. They'll meet you at 6.25 and call it a concession. Accept 6.25. He looked at her for a moment. "How do you know that?" "Because Burrell restructured a note for the Hendersons 2 years ago under similar conditions, and that was exactly the pattern." She paused. "He's a fair man. He simply starts high." Elias picked up the letter, folded it once, and put it in his coat pocket. He did not say thank you. He said, "I'll be back from town by 3, which was its own manner of statement, an accounting of his movements that she had not asked for and that he had not previously offered. She did not examine what it meant until that evening, when she was on the road back to town with the plains going amber in the last of the daylight and the cold coming down fast from the north. The sorrel mare moved at an easy pace, and Clara sat straight in the saddle with her satchel across her knees and let herself think, because the road between the ranch and town was the one place where she permitted herself the luxury of unstructured thought. She thought about the Voss situation, which was not resolved. The draft challenge had gone to the lawyer in Millard Creek, and he had confirmed the flaw in the amendment within 4 days, which had pleased her in the precise, unshowy way that being correct pleased her. But Voss had not responded, and his silence was more concerning than his letters had been. A man who stops writing has started doing. She thought about the ranch hand named Curly Briggs, who had arrived in town 3 weeks ago and taken a room at the far end of the boarding house and done no visible work. Mabel Greer had mentioned him in passing, Clara had asked 2 careful questions and learned that Briggs had come from the direction of Millard Creek and had no stated occupation. She had not mentioned this to Elias yet because she was still building the picture. She was 1 piece short. The wind picked up from the north and cut through her coat at the collar, and she ducked her chin and rode on, and the last light fell off the plains like a curtain dropping, and in the sudden dark the road home felt longer than it had in the morning. She was almost to the edge of town when she heard hoofbeats behind her, fast, deliberate, closing. She did not panic. She turned the mare sideways on the road and waited, because she was a woman who faced approaching things rather than running from them. It was Elias. He pulled up beside her, his horse blowing steam in the cold air, his expression carrying the particular tight control of a man who has been moving fast for a reason he has not yet named aloud. He looked at her in the darkness with something that was not quite relief and not quite anger, the two things sitting together in his face in a way that made her chest do something she chose not to catalogue. "Briggs," he said. "The man at Mabel's boarding house, he works for Voss. I just found out." "I know," Clara said. He stared at her. "You know, I suspected. I was 1 piece short of being certain." She paused. "What was your piece?" "He was at the telegraph office today sending a wire. My foreman saw the address. It was Voss's office in Millard Creek. His jaw was tight. Voss knows about the lawyer. He knows we filed." Clara sat with that for a moment. The wind moved between them, cold and indifferent. Somewhere in the dark a coyote called once and went silent. "Then he'll move before the legal challenge can be heard," she said. "Yes. How long do we have?" Elias looked at her steadily. The darkness made his face harder to read, but his eyes were clear and direct and fully present in a way she had not seen from him before. A week, maybe less. She thought of the mineral rights clause, the defective witness. 31 days becomes 7. If you have been listening to this story, if you have felt what Clara has been quietly carrying across these weeks, then you already know what is truly at stake here has very little to do with land. The question is whether 2 people who have been surviving separately are willing to survive together. And the answer is coming faster than either of them is ready for. She did not go back to town that night. It was not a decision she made with any particular deliberation. It was the kind of decision that makes itself. The cold, the distance, the intelligence of the situation, pressing against the impracticality of riding 12 miles back to a rented room when the problem that needed solving was here, on this ranch, with 7 days or fewer before Harlan Voss made his move. Clara Whitfield was not a woman who chose pride over practicality, and riding away from a crisis she was in the middle of solving would have been exactly that. Elias did not ask her to stay. He turned his horse back toward the ranch without a word, and she turned the sorrel and followed, and that was the entirety of the negotiation. Annette was still awake when they came through the door, sitting at the kitchen table with a mending basket and a lamp, and she looked between them with the quick, careful eyes of a woman who had learned to read a room from the threshold. She asked no questions. She put water on the stove and added wood to the fire and said, "I'll make up the room," and left without waiting for acknowledgement. Clara set her satchel on the study desk and opened it. "I need the full Voss correspondence file and the original deed." Elias pulled them from the shelf without being directed to the right location, which told her he had been reviewing the files himself since she had last organized them. She noticed that. She said nothing. She spread the documents across the desk in chronological order, oldest to newest, and read through them with her finger tracing the margins, not for the words this time, but for the pattern beneath the words. The pattern was what mattered. Letters were performances. What a man chose to perform, and when, and what he chose to omit, revealed the actual shape of his intention more clearly than any single statement. Voss's letters revealed a man who had been patient for 2 years and had stopped being patient approximately 3 months ago. The shift in tone was precise. She could identify the exact letter where his language moved from formal pressure to something with an edge in it, a barely controlled impatience that the careful phrasing could not entirely conceal. 3 months ago. She thought about what had happened 3 months ago on the Kane Ranch. "When did you get married?" she asked. Elias was standing at the window. He turned. 3 months ago. Why? She looked at the letter in her hand. Because Voss's tone changed 3 months ago. He was waiting to see whether you would find a way to stabilize the ranch's finances. When you brought a wife from Kansas," she paused, choosing her words with the same precision she chose everything. He read it as a man consolidating. "He decided to move before you could." Elias was quiet for a moment. He thought Annette had money. Did she? The pause that followed was brief but substantial. "No," he said. "The marriage was a mutual arrangement. Annette needed to leave Kansas. I needed—" He stopped. "You do not need to explain it to me," Clara said, and returned to the documents. She did not think about what he had been about to say. She did not allow herself to think about it. She kept her attention on the paper in front of her and the problem it represented, which was real and immediate and solvable, unlike the other thing, which was none of those things and had no place on this desk. She found what she was looking for at 9:30. It was in the original deed, in a subordinate clause on the third page that had been written in smaller script than the surrounding text, the kind of deliberate minimization that lawyers sometimes employed when they wanted a clause present but not prominent. It was a right of first refusal clause. If the land subject to the Voss note was ever to be transferred, sold, or legally adjudicated, the original landowner, or their designated heir, had the right to reclaim it at the assessed value prior to any third-party acquisition. The original landowner was Elias Kane's father, Robert Kane. Robert Kane had died 18 months ago. His heir was Elias. "Your father built a reclamation right into this deed," Clara said. "If Voss attempts to take the land through legal action, you have the right to reclaim it at assessed value before he can acquire title." She looked up. The assessed value from 3 years ago, before the drought, was considerably lower than what Voss is claiming in damages. Elias crossed the room in 4 strides and stood beside her, leaning over the desk to read the clause himself. He was close enough that she could smell wood smoke on his coat and the cold that still clung to his collar, and she kept her eyes on the page and her breathing even and her hands flat on the desk, with a steadiness she was applying with some effort. He read the clause twice, then he straightened. "My father knew," he said, and there was something in his voice she had not heard before, not quite grief, not quite gratitude, but the particular quiet of a man who has just been reached by someone no longer living. "He knew Voss," Clara said carefully. "Or he knew the kind of man Voss was. He built the protection in before you would have known to ask for it." Elias said nothing. He put one hand on the back of her chair and stood there for a moment in a silence that was not uncomfortable, which surprised her. She had expected the silence between them to always carry the particular tension it had carried in those first days, the tension of 2 people managing a proximity neither had chosen. This was different. This was the silence of 2 people who had been working toward the same thing long enough that the working itself had become the common ground. "I'll write to the lawyer tonight," she said. "He needs to cite this clause in the challenge filing before Voss makes his next move. If Voss files first without knowing this exists, he may be able to delay the reclamation right on procedural grounds." "Tonight," he said. "The morning stage to Millard Creek leaves at 6. If the letter's on it, the lawyer has it by noon." He looked at her directly, without the guarded flatness he had worn like a coat since the first morning she arrived. "Clara," he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name, and they both registered it, the slight change in the air between them, the word landing differently than any other word he had spoken to her. "Thank you." She picked up her pen. "I haven't finished yet," she said, but she felt the warmth of it move through her like the first real heat of a stove after a long cold ride, and she did not name it, and she did not refuse it either. She simply held it quietly inside the work and kept writing, and the lamp burned between them, and outside, the wind scoured the plains clean under a sky full of cold and indifferent stars. The letter went on the morning stage. Clara was back in the saddle before the town was fully awake, the cold sitting hard on the plains and the sky still more gray than blue. She had slept 4 hours. She did not feel them as a deprivation. She felt the particular sharp clarity that comes from sleeping briefly but honestly. And she rode the 12 miles back to the ranch with her mind already moving through the next sequence of what needed to happen and in what order. Elias met her at the gate. He had been awake longer than she had. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, but he was dressed and alert, and there was a quality in the way he looked at her that was different from the quality of any previous morning. Less assessment, more certainty, as though the category he had placed her in had been revised again overnight, and this time the revision was final. "Briggs left the boarding house this morning," he said, "before dawn. Mabel sent word." Clara stilled. "Heading which direction?" "South Road, toward Millard Creek," which meant Voss already knew about the lawyer, which meant the wire Briggs had sent 2 days ago had prompted a response, and the response was movement. "He's going to try to file before our challenge is heard," she said. "If he reaches the county clerk in Millard Creek before the lawyer presents our documentation, I know." His voice was flat and certain. "I'm riding to Millard Creek myself. Today." She looked at him. "The ranch, my foreman can manage one day." He held her gaze. "I want to be there when the filing is made. A man defending his own land in person carries different weight than a letter." He was right, and she recognized it immediately. "Take the deed with the reclamation clause. Take the original, not a copy, and take the bank's preliminary response to the restructuring proposal. It demonstrates active financial engagement. It signals you are not in default." He was already moving back toward the house. She followed because there was more to prepare and less time than either of them had, and standing at the gate discussing it accomplished nothing. They worked for 40 minutes at the study desk side by side, pulling the documents he would need and ordering them in the sequence the lawyer would require. Their hands moved across the same papers, passing pages without fumbling, the rhythm of it easy in a way that had been built incrementally across weeks of shared labor, and had arrived without ceremony at something that functioned like fluency. Annette appeared in the doorway. She looked at the two of them at the desk and then at Elias and said, "Your horse is ready. I had Cobb saddle him." Elias looked up. Something passed between him and Annette in that moment, not warmth exactly, but a mutual acknowledgement, the look of two people who had agreed on the terms of something and were both honoring the agreement. "Thank you," he said. Annette looked at Clara. "I'll manage the house. You should go with him." Clara met her eyes. "I'm not needed in Millard Creek. The documents speak for themselves." "That's not why I said it," Annette said quietly, and then she turned and went back to the kitchen, and the directness of it sat in the air of the study like a bell that had been struck and could not be unstruck. Clara did not look at Elias. She straightened the document packet and tied it with the cord from the desk drawer and set it flat in front of him. "Everything is in order," she said. "The reclamation clause is on top. The lawyer's name is Aldous Marsh. He knows to expect you." Elias picked up the packet. He stood there for a moment without moving toward the door, and she could feel the weight of something he was deciding, the particular stillness of a man at a threshold of more than one kind. "When I come back," he said, and then he stopped. She waited. "When I come back," he said again, more slowly, as though finding the words by feel in the dark, "I'd like to discuss a more permanent arrangement. For the accounts." It was not what he had started to say. They both knew it, and neither of them said so, and that unspoken knowledge was its own form of honesty between them. "We can discuss it when you return," Clara said. He nodded once. He picked up his hat from the desk corner, settled it, and walked out. She heard the front door, the porch steps, the sound of his horse moving out of the yard at a pace that meant he intended to cover 20 miles fast. She stood in the empty study for a long moment with her hands at her sides and the morning light coming through the dusty window glass in long, pale angles, and she let herself feel the full weight of what the last several weeks had been, not in the sentimental way she had trained herself against, but honestly, the way she had been trained to be honest about numbers. She named what she had. She named what it cost. She named what she was willing to pay. Then she went to find Annette. She found her in the kitchen, not cooking, simply standing at the window with a cup going cold in her hands, looking out at the road Elias had taken. Clara stood in the doorway. Annette did not turn around. "He's a good man," Annette said. "He's always been a good man." She paused. "He is simply not my man, and I'm not his woman. We both knew it before we reached Kansas. We were both too tired to admit it." Clara said nothing. The iron stove ticked in the silence. "I'm going back to Kansas in the spring," Annette said. "My sister is there. There was a situation I was running from that is since resolved." She turned from the window then, and looked at Clara with the same direct, unguarded look she had offered on that first morning. "I am telling you this because you deserve to know it before you decide what to do with what you already feel." Clara looked at her for a long moment. "That's a very frank thing to say to a woman you barely know." "You rebuilt this ranch in 3 weeks," Annette said simply. "I think you can handle frankness." Something in Clara's chest moved, not the collapsing thing she had felt at the window 3 weeks ago watching the wagon roll down Main Street, but something with more oxygen in it, something that had room to expand. "Thank you, Annette," she said. Annette picked up her mending from the table. "He'll be back by dark," she said. "The stove will need wood at 4. Clara added wood to the stove at 4. She sat with the ledger open and did not write in it. She listened to the plains and the wind and the sound of the ranch breathing around her in the late afternoon. And she waited without performing patience, because she had learned a long time ago that the things worth waiting for did not arrive any faster for being watched. He came through the gate at dusk, his horse lathered and his coat dusty, and his face carrying something new in it, not relief, not triumph, but the clean and quiet expression of a man who has done what needed to be done and is no longer braced against what comes next. He unsaddled his own horse. She knew because she heard him in the barn, the particular sounds of a man doing familiar work, the creak of leather, the heavy knock of a saddle on its rest, the low voice a man uses with an animal he trusts. She did not go out to meet him. She stayed at the kitchen table with her hands folded and the lamp lit and the stove warm behind her, and she let him come in when he was ready, because a man who has ridden 40 miles in a day deserves the dignity of arriving on his own terms. He came through the back door with his hat in his hand and mud on his boots and stopped when he saw her sitting there in the lamplight. He looked at her the way he had been looking at her for several weeks now, with the full weight of his attention, nothing held back, nothing performed, and she looked back at him with equal steadiness. "Aldous Marsh filed the challenge at 2:30, he said. Briggs arrived at the county clerk's office at 3:45. He set his hat on the hook by the door. "We beat him by 1 hour and 13 minutes. Clara let out one slow breath. "And the reclamation clause?" The clerk confirmed it's valid. Voss's lawyer was there. He read it in the office. Elias crossed to the stove and poured coffee from the pot she had kept warm without being asked to, and she watched him do it and felt the simple domesticity of the moment settle over the room like something earned rather than assumed. Voss can still pursue the debt, but he cannot take the land without my right of first refusal, and the assessed value from 3 years ago is less than half what he's claiming. So he gains nothing by pursuing it, Clara said. His lawyer said as much, in different words. He sat down across the table from her, not at the desk, not at a professional distance, but at the table itself, the way a man sits when he is no longer managing the distance between himself and another person. "It's over." The words sat in the room quietly. Outside, the last of the daylight was gone, and the plains had gone dark and still, and the wind that had been pressing at the walls all day had eased, the way wind sometimes eases after the thing it was announcing has finally arrived. "Annette told me she spoke with you," he said. "She did." He looked at his coffee cup. He turned it once in his hands, the gesture slow and considered, and then he set it down and looked at her directly. "I owe you an honesty," he said. The marriage to Annette was an arrangement. She needed passage out of a difficult situation. I told myself, I needed someone to manage the house. He paused. I was wrong about what I needed. Clara waited. "I knew it before we reached Kansas," he said, which was almost exactly what Annette had said, and the fact that 2 people had been living with the same knowledge at the same time in the same house, landed in her chest with a weight she did not try to minimize. "I had no right to it. I had no basis for it. I had spoken to you once on the street and watched you walk away and—" He stopped. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has run out of deflections and is standing in the open without cover and has decided, finally, to stay there. "I had no basis for it," he said again, "but I knew." Clara looked at him for a long moment. The lamp between them was steady and warm, and his face in its light was tired and honest and more open than she had believed it capable of being in those first cold days when he had ridden past her on the street and touched his hat brim, and she had refused to attach meaning to it. She'd been right to refuse it then. She was not refusing it now. "I have been in this town for 3 years," she said. "I have been practical and careful, and I have built something small but solid, and I have not permitted myself the indulgence of wanting something I had no evidence of being offered." She kept her voice level, because level was not the same as cold, and she needed him to understand the difference. "I am not a woman who performs emotion for approval. I will not begin now." "I'm not asking you to," he said. "I know what you are asking," she said. He looked at her steadily. "Then I'm asking it plainly. No arrangement, no contract, no mutual convenience." He leaned forward slightly across the table, and in the small distance that remained between them, she could see everything he had spent the whole of their acquaintance refusing to show: the exhaustion, the want, the careful and terrified hope of a man who has been alone inside his own pride for so long that the prospect of company feels like both rescue and exposure. "Clara, stay." She did not answer immediately, not because she did not know the answer, but because she had spent 3 years learning the difference between a thing that felt true and a thing that was true, and she took the time now to confirm for herself, quietly and completely, that this was both. "The North Pasture Note restructuring closes in 30 days, she said. "The Voss challenge will need to be monitored through the county process. The spring calving projections will need to be updated against actual herd counts in February." She looked at him across the lamplight. "The accounts are going to require consistent attention for at least the next 2 years before this operation is stable." His mouth moved. It was not almost a smile this time. It arrived fully, quiet and unguarded, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it changed his face entirely, not into something soft, but into something human, something that had been there all along beneath the pride and the weariness and the careful management of distance. "Is that a yes?" he said. "It is a very thorough yes," she said. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his, not grasping, not dramatic, simply placing his hand over hers the way a man places a hand on a thing he is choosing to keep, with the full and quiet intention of someone who has made a decision he will not be taking back. His palm was warm and roughened from years of rope and iron and hard work, and she turned her hand beneath his and held it. The stove settled behind her with a low tick of cooling iron. Outside, the first stars appeared over the dark plains, cold and innumerable, and indifferent to the small warm light in the ranch house kitchen. The wind had gone entirely still. Annette was upstairs. The ranch was quiet around them, and Clara Whitfield sat in the lamplight with her hand in Elias Kane's, and did not think about the 3 years or the wagon rolling down Main Street or the window she had pressed her forehead against in a moment of grief she had refused to name. She thought only of the ledger on the desk in the study, the one she would open again tomorrow morning, and the long and honest work of a life being built, entry by careful entry, in a place she had not chosen and had come without quite meaning to call her own. She had not waited 3 years for him. She had spent 3 years becoming someone worth choosing, and he had come home to find her already there.